I paid for my granddaughter's wedding, all of it. The venue, the flowers, the band, the dress, the photographer. I even paid for the invitations. $900 for 200 of them, cream paper, raised ink, tied with a little ribbon the color of butter. I know because I wrote the check myself, at my kitchen table, with my reading glasses on. I never got one. And here is the part I want you to hold in your two hands for the next hour. The reception was booked into a long brick building on the square in our town, a building with a certain history. For 40 years, that building was a diner, my diner. I stood behind that counter through 8 presidents and 2 floods, and I fed this whole town breakfast, and I paid $16,500 for my granddaughter to dance her first dance in the room where I flipped eggs my entire working life. And I was not invited to watch. They found out I knew, and what came back eventually was an offer. I could sit in the church if I wanted, in the back, for the ceremony only. My daughter said, and I am quoting her, "We just don't want you to feel out of place, Dad." So I made one phone call. One. On a Sunday evening, sitting on my porch with the phone in my hand for a long time before I dialed. It was not to a lawyer. It was not to the bank. It lasted 11 minutes. It was the quietest conversation I've had in my life. And by the time the wedding day came, everything, and I mean everything, had changed. But a story is like a meal. You don't serve the pie first. So pull up a chair, friend, because I've got a long one for you tonight. My name is Ray. I'm 71 years old. I fried eggs for a living for 40 years, and I know more about this town than the newspaper and the church combined, because people will tell a man behind a counter things they won't tell God. And this is a story about lists. Who makes them, who gets left off them, and the difference between a guest list and a table. I bought the diner in the spring of 1982, when I was 27 years old and had no business doing it. It sat on the north side of the square, long and narrow, brick outside, with a counter running the whole length and 12 stools and 9 booths, and the fellow selling it, old man Teague, was so tired of the place he practically threw in his apron. I had $2,000, a loan my father had to Kathleen, and a wife who believed in me so hard it embarrassed the bankers. Her name was Dorothy. Everybody called her Dot. And when the sign painter came, I didn't have to think for even a second what was going over that door. Dots. Red neon, cursive, with a period at the end, because my wife said a name without a period looks like it isn't sure of itself. 40 years that sign hummed over the square. You could see it from the funeral home and the courthouse both, which Dot said covered a person's whole journey if you thought about it. I did the cooking. Dot ran the front, the register, the gossip, and me. We opened at 5:30 for the farmers and the second shift coming off at the plant, and I learned my trade the honest way, which is by ruining eggs for people too polite to say so. By the second year, I could work a griddle like a church organ. By the 5th year, the county fair was giving my pie a blue ribbon they should have given Dot, since it was her mother's recipe, apple, with a lattice top and a squeeze of lemon nobody could ever taste, but everybody could tell when it was missing. I want you to understand what a diner is in a town like ours, because it matters to everything that comes later. It's not a restaurant. It's the room where the town happens. Deals got shook on at my counter. Marriages got saved and a few got quietly ended in my back booth. The sheriff ate breakfast next to men he'd arrested and would again. When the plant laid people off in '91, there was a winter when I ran half my tickets on a tab I kept in a spiral notebook under the register, and Dot never once asked me about the arithmetic. She just watched me carry that notebook and loved me. Most of those tabs got paid. The ones that didn't, well, I've eaten expensive meals in my life that fed me less. I'll give you one morning so you can stand in it with me. A February, deep snow sometime in the '90s. The plows had been out all night, and at 5:15 before we unlocked, Dot had the urn going and was stacking cups, and I said, "We're not open." And she said, "They've been in those trucks since midnight, Raymond," and she flipped the sign herself. 6 plow drivers ate eggs at my counter in their coats, steam coming off them like horses, and when the county supervisor tried to pay, Dot rang it up as zero and said, "You'll vote yes on the school levy and we'll call it square." That was our marriage, friend, and our business model, and our religion, all three at once, and no, it does not scale as the young people say. It was never supposed to. It was supposed to be a room where nobody stayed cold. We had the one child, Kathleen, born in 1980. And I'm going to tell this part straight, because she's my daughter and I love her, and this story doesn't work if I sand her down or if I sand myself down either. Kathleen grew up in that diner, and Kathleen hated that diner. Not at first. At first she was 6 years old standing on a milk crate, ringing the register with Dot's hands over hers. But somewhere around 13, the age where a child's eyes change and they start seeing their life the way they imagine other people see it, my daughter looked around and saw grease and gravy and her father in an apron, and she was ashamed. There was an afternoon, she was maybe 15, when a carload of the kind of girls who mattered at her school came in after a game, and Kathleen was bussing tables, and I watched my daughter drop her tray flat and walk into the kitchen and take her apron off and stand there against the walk-in with a face I'd never seen. She said, "Daddy, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to be a diner person. I'm going to be somebody." And God forgive me, I laughed. Not at her, I want to be clear. I was laughing at somebody, the idea of it, the way she said it like a title. But she was 15, and 15 doesn't hear the difference, and I've had 30 years since to wonder how much of this whole story got its start in that 1 second of her father laughing in a kitchen. She went off to state on money the griddle earned, which she took, I'll note, without any complaint about where it came from. And she became, more or less, what she set out to be. Married a fellow named Rick young and fast, had Emily in 99, and Rick was gone by the time Emily was 3, which is a whole other story that isn't mine to tell tonight. And for a stretch of years there, the hard years, the single mother years, Kathleen came home. Not to live, she'd have died first. But Friday nights, her little hatchback would pull around back of the diner, and Emily would come through my kitchen door like a swallow into a barn. Those were the years I got my granddaughter, and I mean got her, the way you get a language when you're young enough. Emily on the third stool from the register, the wobbly one, the one I never fixed because she said it was her horse. Emily doing homework in the last booth with Dot checking her spelling. Emily at 9 years old standing on the same milk crate her mother stood on, cracking eggs one-handed because I taught her, and announcing to a counter full of farmers, "I'm going to run this place someday," and the farmers all saying "yes ma'am" and meaning it. She had Dot's laugh. Has. A laugh that turns heads 3 booths away. And she loved that wobbly stool and my terrible coffee and her grandmother's apple pie. And she loved us. And I don't require a thing in this world past that sentence. The summer she was 12, Emily worked the counter proper. Dot made her a name tag out of a jar lid and ribbon, and a cardboard star that said Employee of the Month, every month, all 3 months. She learned the regulars' orders by heart, and she invented a milkshake, peanut butter and blackberry jam, that should have been against the law and outsold vanilla by August. And one afternoon, a table of summer tourists got short with her over nothing, over toast, and my 12-year-old granddaughter straightened her jar lid name tag and said, "Sir, we don't rush the toast here. It comes when it's ready exactly, and I mean exactly, the way her grandmother said it." Dot laughed so hard she had to sit down on the pie cooler. That's the girl we're talking about tonight. I need you to know who she was before I tell you what her mother told her I was. Then Kathleen married Brad Sutter. Emily was 10, and I'll say this about Brad and try to be fair. He's not a cruel man. He's a man made entirely out of surfaces is what he is. Sells commercial real estate in the city, big laugh, soft hands, calls me Big Ray, and in 17 years he has never once finished a cup of my coffee. And Kathleen, my daughter, who'd spent her whole life wanting to be from somewhere else, was finally from somewhere else. The house in the right suburb, the club, the Christmas card with the dog in it, the Friday nights ended. Emily got older and busier the way they do, and her mother worked on her quietly, year over year, the way water works on a stone, teaching her the new family language, and the diner became the place they were from and stopped being the place they went. I don't hold growing up against anybody. Emily called on Sundays, most Sundays, and came at Christmas, and when she got engaged to a young man named Connor Whitfield, she drove out to show us the ring. To show me and Manny the ring at the counter. Remember that. It matters. Now. In 2019, my wife started forgetting the ends of her sentences, and I sold the diner that winter to Manny Ortiz, who had been my line cook for 25 years, who came to me at 19 with fast hands and no English and left my kitchen owning it, which is the American story people say doesn't happen anymore. It happens. You just have to be standing at a griddle to see it. I sold him the business and the building both, honest price, carried part of the note myself, and the last thing I did was take down the spiral notebook from under the register and hand it to him, and Manny, who is not a crier, cried. I'll tell you the real reason I sold when I did, which I've never said out loud until tonight. Toward the end of that last year, Dot's arithmetic started leaving her at the register. This is a woman who could carry 6 checks in her head and split a farmer's breakfast 4 ways while pouring coffee. And I watched her stand there one Tuesday with a $10 bill in her hand and a line at the register, lost. And before I could get down the counter, Manny was there, wiping his hands, saying, "Miss Dot, this drawer's been sticking again, let me." And he rang it while she supervised, and he did that, some version of that, every single day for 4 months, so smooth that half the town never knew. You want to know what I sold my life's work for? I got a fair price, but I'd have taken half for the way that man guarded my wife's dignity with a rag over his shoulder. I took Dot home, and for 4 years I did the only work I've ever done that mattered more than feeding people, which was loving my wife all the way to the door. She died in the spring of 23, in our bedroom, with lilacs blooming outside the window, because she'd planted lilacs under every window we ever had. She said a window without a smell was just a hole in the wall. I still keep them pruned. You couldn't stop me with a court order. And Manny, meanwhile, did what I never had the nerve to do. He shut the diner for 8 months and gutted it. Kept the brick, kept the long room, kept, God bless him, the counter, refinished till it glowed, and the 12 stools. But he turned the back into a proper kitchen and the whole thing into a place called the Linden Room, which does dinners on the weekend and weddings and retirements and such, with string lights and a 100-year-old maple floor. It's beautiful. It's in the regional magazines. Brides book it a year out. And when it reopened, Manny had me cut the ribbon, and inside the front door there's a photograph on the wall, black and white, big as a window. It's me and Dot behind the counter, 1988, her laughing me with a spatula. Manny says it's so the building doesn't forget who it is. I say it's so nobody ever wonders if the old cook approved. So that's the table set. Now let me serve you what happened. A year ago last spring, Kathleen came out to the house alone, which should have been my first clue. My daughter doesn't drive 2 hours for coffee any more than her stepfather-in-law drinks it. Emily and Connor were engaged. The wedding would be next fall, and well, Dad, weddings now aren't like weddings then. The Whitfields are, you know, established. Connor's mother has expectations. And Brad's business had had a soft year, commercial real estate being what it was, and it would mean the world. It would just mean the world if I could help with some of it. For Emily. For Emily. 2 words that could get my wallet, my truck, and most of my blood. I said what I'd been hoping to get to say since the girl was 9 years old standing on a milk crate. I said, Kathleen, I'll pay for the whole thing. You should have seen my daughter's face. Relief first, real relief, I don't doubt it. Money trouble is money trouble in any zip code. But behind the relief, quick as a fish, something else went by. I know now what it was. It was a problem being invented. Because in the world my daughter had spent 30 years climbing into, the money is the story. The father of the bride's family hosts. The right people pay for the right things. The wedding is a statement of account read aloud in flowers. And a diner man's money spends fine, but a diner man's name on things, well, that was going to need managing. I saw the fish go by, and I didn't know what it was, and here's my confession for tonight, friend, because every story I tell you from this porch has one. I didn't ask. Same as I didn't fix the wobble in that stool, I didn't poke at it. 60 years behind a counter teaches you that most things wobble a little and hold anyway. Some things you should poke. Now the way I pay for things is the way my father paid for things. Directly by check to the person doing the work with a firm handshake attached where possible. I don't do the apps. So through that fall and winter, the invoices came to my kitchen table and I wrote checks. $16,005 to Manny for the Linden Room, dinner and floor and all. $3,200 to Rosie DeLuca at the flower shop, whose father I carried on the notebook in '91. $4,000 to the Tallman Brothers Band, whose daddy played my counter every New Year's for 30 years, stand-up bass between the pie case and the register. $2,800 at Misho's for the dress, $3,500 to the photographer, a kid named Deke who washed dishes for me 2 summers in high school, and on down. $900 for the invitations, cream, raised ink, butter ribbon. $38,500 and change, all told, and I'd write it again tomorrow morning, and don't let anything I say tonight muddy that. It was for Emily. That part was never the wound. And I'll confess something soft here because you've stayed with me this far. I kept every receipt and every invoice in a cigar box on my kitchen table, and it wasn't for the accounting. Some evenings I'd go through them with my coffee, the way another man might look at photographs. Florals, lilac, quantity 40. Tallman Brothers, deposit, 4 hours plus overtime. Alterations, ivory, size 8. It was the only version of the wedding I had, that box, and I furnished it in my head, receipt by receipt, the room, the music, the girl in the dress. I danced with the bride 100 times at my kitchen table before anybody told me I wasn't on the list. An old man can live a long time on paper, friend. It's not nourishment exactly, but it keeps the pilot lit. But notice something, because I promise you every vendor in this town noticed it. The checks all said Ray. Rosie knew. Manny knew. The Tallman boys knew, Deke knew, half the square knew, because a small town is just a big room, always was. Everybody knew who was paying for the Whitfield wedding. Everybody except the people coming to it. Spring came and the lilacs, and I got my suit cleaned, the gray one dot picked, and I waited for my invitation. Cream, raised ink. I'd paid for it after all, though I wanted understood I wasn't thinking that way. A man doesn't invoice his own family. I was just waiting the way you wait for a thing that's certain. And it didn't come. And I did the math about mail. I was a young man once too. Everything runs late around a wedding. And it didn't come. And the first cold drop of water went down my back at the barber shop, of all places, first week of June, when Harold, who's cut my hair since Ford was president, spun me around in the chair and said, "So, the big day's what, 3 months out? My Ginny's doing the cake, you know." 200 people, she heard. You must be proud as a rooster. 200 people. My Ginny's doing the cake. And me sitting in that chair with hair on my shoulders, finding out the head count of my own granddaughter's wedding at the barber shop, and doing what a man my age does with a shock, which is to smile with all the front teeth and say, "Proud as a rooster, Harold. That's exactly right," and then sit real still while he does around the ears. I told myself a story driving home. Kathleen's overwhelmed. The invitations went out in waves. Family comes last because family's certain. It's a good story. It got me through supper. Then came Rosie. Middle of June, I'm at the flower shop buying my usual, Because every other Saturday since 23 I take lilacs to the cemetery when they're blooming and roses when they're not. And Rosie DeLuca comes around the counter and takes both my hands, and her eyes are wet. And she says, "Ray, I just have to say it. What you're doing for that girl is beautiful." And then, my hand still in hers, she says the thing that rearranged my year. She says, and honey, when Emily came in for her consult, you know what she ordered for the tables? Lilacs. Nothing but lilacs, wherever we can get them that late. And I said, "Sweetheart, they're spring flowers. They'll cost you in September." And she said she didn't care. She said, and Ray, I'm quoting your granddaughter now, "Someone I love has them under every window, and I want the whole room to smell like her yard. Someone I love has them under every window." I made it to the truck. I want that on the record, friend. I made it all the way to the truck before I came apart, with the lilacs for Dot on the seat beside me, in front of God and the square and the red neon sign 2 doors down that doesn't say Dots anymore. Because you see what I knew right then, don't you? Same thing, you know. Whatever was happening with that guest list, whatever managing was being done, it wasn't Emily doing it. A girl doesn't fill a room with her grandmother's flowers and bar the door to her grandfather. The wobble I'd felt at my kitchen table and declined to poke, it wasn't in the girl. It was in my daughter, and that was worse. I called Kathleen that night, and I'm going to give you this conversation nearly whole because I've replayed it enough times to have it cold, and because if you've lived any length of time in a family, I suspect you've had some version of it, and it helps a man to hear his own conversation happen to somebody else. That's half of why I'm on this porch every week, if I'm honest. I said, "Kathleen, Harold tells me 200 people. Rosie tells me lilacs. It's a beautiful sounding wedding. When were you planning on inviting me to it?" Silence, the kind with machinery running behind it. Then, "Dad, don't be dramatic. Nobody's not inviting you. It's just, it's complicated. The Whitfields are hosting. Technically, it's their name on the hosting line. That's how it's done. And the guest list had to be balanced. Their side is enormous. The senator might come, Dad. And honestly, the whole thing is more Connor's mother's event than ours at this point." I said, "Kathleen, it's the Linden Room. I paid for it. I could walk there from the barber shop. Balance me a chair." And then the machinery caught, and out it came, smooth, prepared. The fish I'd watched go by a year before, all grown now. "Dad, be honest, is that really your scene? Seated dinner, city people, toasts in French, probably. Bunny Whitfield does that. You'd be miserable. You'd sit there all night with nobody to talk to. We just, and here it is, friend, here's the sentence. We just don't want you to feel out of place." Out of place. In the room where I stood for 40 years. Where the maple floor those city people would be dancing on has a pale ring near the register from 4 decades of my shoes at the Griddle station. Manny showed me after the refinish. Said the sander wouldn't take it all the way out. Said he told the floor man leave it. That ring's load-bearing. But she wasn't done, and the last part is the part that took the year off my life. Her voice went gentle, gentle the way a nurse's voice goes when the news is bad, and she said, and Dad, honestly, Emily agrees. She's got a vision for the day, it's her wedding, and she just feels, we all feel, it'll be smoother this way. She'd be so embarrassed if she knew we were even having this conversation. Please don't make it weird for her. She's so happy right now. Emily agrees. She'd be so embarrassed. I said something to end the call. I don't recall what. Politeness runs deep in my generation. We'd thank the hangman for a smooth rope. And I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I wrote $38,000 of checks, in a house so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall change its mind, and I believed her. That's the part I'd take back, not the money, that one night of believing it, because it fit, don't you see? It fit the shape of every fear an old man keeps in the drawer by his bed. That's how the sharpest lies work. They don't argue with you, they agree with you. Of course the girl outgrew me. Of course the wobbly stool and the milk crate and the one-handed eggs. Of course, all that got packed in a box in an attic somewhere the way everything does. Kids grow up and out and away. Everybody says so. The coffee counter wisdom I'd served 40 years came back around my own counter and served itself to me, and I ate it. And 3 days later the mailbox coughed up an envelope. Not cream. White thin, the kind you buy at the drugstore. Inside, a church program, the ceremony card, 2 o'clock, St. Bridget's in the city, and on it in my daughter's hand, blue ballpoint, 5 words. Ceremony only. Hope you understand. Hope you understand. The reception, you'll recall, being held in my diner. I have been mad, truly mad, maybe 4 times in my life. This wasn't that. This was something slower and colder that I don't have a good name for, the thing that happens when hurt finishes soaking all the way through and comes out the other side as arithmetic. I stood in my yard by the mailbox and did the sums. Somebody had decided the money could come, but the man couldn't. Somebody had told the town nothing, because the town all assumed, reasonably, that the man paying was the man hosting. And somebody had told Emily something, because girls who order lilacs for their grandmother's memory do not write hope you understand on a drugstore envelope. 3 somebodies, 1 daughter. That Saturday I took the lilacs out to Dorothy, it being June, and I sat on the grass by her stone longer than usual, and I told her all of it. The ceremony card, the drugstore envelope, the blue ballpoint. I keep her current, I told you. It's the best hour of my week most weeks. And I'm not a man who hears voices, but I know my wife's positions on things the way I know a specials board, and sitting there with my hat in my hands I could hear her clear as Tuesday. Raymond, you've been stood at the back door of something that was yours before. What did we do about it? And what we did about it in 1982, when the bank and the Teagues and half the square said a fry cook couldn't carry a mortgage, was not holler. We got quiet, and we got the paperwork right, and we opened anyway. I set the lilacs against her stone, and I said, all right, Dot. Quiet it is. Now, here's where, if this were a certain kind of story, the kind they make a lot of these days, I'd tell you I called the bank and stopped the checks. Burned it all down, banned, flowers, floor, and let the Whitfields cater 200 people on Brad's soft year. I'd be lying if I said the thought never knocked. It knocked. I let it stand on the porch a while too. But friend, 40 years of feeding a town teaches you one thing above everything, and it's this. You never take food off a table to settle a score, and a wedding is a table. And more than that, every dollar of that money was for Emily, the lilac girl. Whatever her mother had built around her, that girl had ordered her grandmother's flowers by the roomful, and you do not ever make the child pay the parent's bill. I'd watched Kathleen pay for my laugh in that kitchen for 30 years. I know exactly what a child paying a parent's bill runs to. So the money stayed. Every check stood. Remember that at the end of this story when you're deciding what kind of story it was. Instead, on the last Sunday in June, I sat on this porch with my phone in my hand while the light went down for the better part of an hour. Because I'd realized something, doing my cold arithmetic, something so simple it took me 3 days to see it. Every word I knew about what Emily thought had come through Kathleen. Every one. For years now, come to think of it, the Sunday calls had gotten shorter and further apart, and whose phone had the family plan, and who relayed whose hellos, and who told me Emily was just swamped, and who told Emily I'd have bet the house by then. Some soft-voiced version of Grandpa's slowing down. Grandpa doesn't like a fuss. Grandpa's not been himself since Grandma. There was a switchboard in this family, and it had one operator. So I made one quiet call, not to Kathleen, not to a lawyer, not to Manny, not to the bank. I called my granddaughter direct, her own number, which I had to get from Deke the photographer, and doesn't that tell you everything? A man getting his own grandchild's phone number off a vendor invoice. She picked up on the second ring, and I said, Emily, it's your grandpa. And before I could get the next word staged, my granddaughter, 26 years old in her city apartment with her wedding 12 weeks out, said, and her voice cracked in half on it, "Grandpa, oh my God, are you okay?" Mom said, and there she stopped, and there was a long quiet, the operator's wires humming between us one last time, and then, careful like a person walking out onto ice, she said, "Grandpa, are you well enough to travel? Because Mom told me the doctor said your heart can't handle events. She said you couldn't even manage the ceremony, that you'd insist if I asked you and it could kill you, and that the kindest thing I could do was not ask. Grandpa, I ordered flowers for you and Grandma. I was going to send you pictures of the room and sit with you the week after and show you everything. My heart, friend, which that very morning had carried 2 flats of mulch up a hill for the lilacs, was the reason. She hadn't cut me from her list. She'd been protecting me from it. There were 2 fences built, one around each of us, both stamped with the same 3 words, "For your good." 11 minutes that call. I told you it was quiet. It was the quietest wrecking ball you ever heard. I told her the truth in plain carpentry. "No, sweetheart, my heart's fine. My heart's sitting on the porch looking at your grandmother's lilacs right now. Nobody ever told me you wanted me anywhere. I got a ceremony card in the mail with 'Hope you understand' on it, and I understood exactly nothing. And I called you because the flowers didn't match the story, and flowers don't lie. And I did not say one word about checks. Not one. To this day I've never told her, and if you know her, don't you tell her either. A gift with a receipt stapled to it is an invoice. That was never the point of the money. But the vendors, bless them all, had never signed on to anybody's switchboard. Because the very next Saturday, Emily and Connor drove out for their final walkthrough at the Linden Room, and Manny, who'd been told by Kathleen months back that Grandpa knows, he just doesn't do events, Manny walked them the length of that glowing counter and passed the big photograph of me and Dot laughing in 1988, and at the end, ordinary as weather. He flipped open his folder and said, "Okay, Mihija, final balance is squared away. Ray's check cleared in May. That man pays faster than the county." And my granddaughter stood in the middle of my diner, where her horse of a stool was still bolted third from the register, holding a folder of invoices with her grandfather's name on every last page, the room, the lilacs, the band, the dress on her own back. And Connor says she went so white he made her sit down. On the stool. Of course, on the stool. What happened in my daughter's living room that Sunday I got second-hand, and I'll keep most of it, because I wasn't there and hearsay is hearsay, even mine. What I know is that Emily drove straight there from the walkthrough with the folder and laid the pages out on Kathleen's marble island one at a time like a poker hand, and asked one question. Not about money. The question was, what did his voice sound like when you told him he wasn't coming? And my daughter, who can balance any list in the world but that one, had no answer that survived contact with the air. Brad, I'm told, left the room. Brad has a gift for leaving rooms. Emily called me that night. Crying, the kind of crying that's got years in it, not weeks. And in the middle of all of it, my granddaughter said, "Grandpa, I don't want a wedding I can't have you at. I'll cancel it. I'll get married at the courthouse and eat pie at the counter, I mean it." And I said, and this may be the only wisdom in this entire story, so write it down, "Sweetheart, nobody cancels a wedding to punish a switchboard. You'll marry your young man in front of everybody because a wedding's a table, and a table is for feeding people, not settling with them. All I ever wanted was a chair." She was quiet a second. Then she said, "No, not a chair." And she asked me the thing that, when I go, I'd like read out at the funeral in place of the obituary, because it says everything about me a stranger would need. She said, "My dad's not in the picture, Grandpa, and he was never in it. You're it. You were always it. Will you walk me down the aisle?" The lilacs, I should tell you, held their bloom late that September, first time in years. Dot showing off is my theory. Nobody can tell me different. The wedding day, then. Because I know you've been waiting on it, and so was I, for 12 weeks, in a pressed gray suit with a lilac sprig on the lapel that Rosie DeLuca pinned there herself at 7 in the morning, crying in her shop, before I ever got in the truck. And I'll tell you something I did that morning that nobody knew about but Manny. Before the church, before any of it, I drove to the square at 8 o'clock, and Manny let me in through the kitchen door of the Linden Room, the way I'd let myself in 10,000 mornings, and then he made himself scarce, because Manny knows things. And I stood in that long room alone, all set for 200, white linen and Rosie's lilacs already on the tables, and I walked the length of the counter with my hand on the wood, and I stood a minute in my footprints, by where the griddle used to be. 40 years of 5:30 mornings in that one spot. My eyes were closed, I'll admit it, and the room did what old rooms do if you stand still in them. It played its tape, the bell on the door, the plates, Dot calling an order. Then Manny stuck his head out of the kitchen and said, "Oi viejo, don't you have somewhere to be?" And I did. I had somewhere to be. St. Bridget's at 2 o'clock. I will not pretend the walk from the back of that church to the front of it, with my granddaughter's hand through my arm, wasn't the longest and shortest distance I've ever traveled. 200 faces turning, the Whitfield side in their city tailoring, wondering politely who the old fellow was, and our side, the town side, Harold and Ginny and Rosie and Deke and the Tallman boys and half my old counter regulars, not wondering anything at all. Kathleen in the front pew in the mother of the bride spot, looking at me over all those pearls with an expression I'd last seen 30 years earlier against a walk-in cooler, except this time she was the one holding the dropped tray. I nodded to her. I want it known I nodded. And Emily squeezed my arm at the top of the aisle and whispered, "Don't you dare cry yet. We're saving it," and handed her flowers to her maid, and married her young man who I like, who finishes his coffee. But the reception, friend, the reception. Manny had the string lights on and the maple floor glowing, and 200 people came into the Linden Room to lilacs on every table, the whole long room smelling like a yard in May, like my yard, like her yard. The Whitfields said all night that they'd never smelled anything like it. And when the toasts came, after the best man, after Bunny Whitfield's very fine French, my granddaughter stood up in her dress with a microphone nobody had scheduled her to have and said, "I want to tell you all where you're sitting." And she told them that this room fed this town for 40 years, that the counter behind the bar there is original and the third stool from the register wobbles, and it wobbles because the man who owned this place left it that way for a little girl who called it her horse. And no, they shouldn't fix it. Some things are load-bearing. That the flowers on their tables were her grandmother's flowers, who they should all be sad they never met, and that the man who walked her down the aisle today cooked in this exact spot through 8 presidents and 2 floods. And then she raised her glass, and she did not say one word about money, because she is her grandmother all over, and she said, "To my grandfather Ray." Every good thing at this table came through his hands one way or another. It always has. 200 people stood up, in my diner. And the Tallman boys, who I did not pay one extra dime for this, and you may verify that, went straight from the toast into the first bars of the song Dot used to hum at the register, every day, for 40 years, because their daddy heard it 1,000 times from the far end of the counter, and the whole town side of the room laughed and cried at the same time, which is the correct way to do both. I danced with the bride. The floor man sander never did get my ring out of the maple, and I stood in it, in my 40-year footprints, and danced with my granddaughter on it. And if you want to know what justice feels like, friend, it doesn't feel like winning. It smells like lilacs, and it sounds like a wobbly stool, and it feels like standing in the one spot on earth that proves you were here, with the proof of why in your arms. Kathleen and I didn't speak that night beyond the nod, but along about October, a letter came. Real letter, blue ballpoint her hand. Most of it stays between a father and his daughter, but there's one line I'll give you because somebody listening tonight might need it for a letter of their own. She wrote, "I told myself every fence I built was for somebody else's good, and I have been standing behind the last one a long time now, and Dad, it is cold back here." I wrote back one line and a time and a place. The Linden Room does a Tuesday breakfast now, off menu, for old-timers. Manny's idea of a memorial and a joke both. First Tuesday of November, my daughter Kathleen, 64 years old in a plain coat with no pearls, walked into her father's diner, passed the photograph of her parents laughing in 1988, and sat down at the counter. Not a booth, the counter, 2 stools from her daughter's horse. And we had eggs and terrible coffee, and we didn't solve 30 years in one breakfast. Friend, that's not how counters work. But she came back the Tuesday after, and the one after that. Last month she bust her own plate, carried it back to Manny's window herself, easy as breathing, and I looked at the ceiling so she wouldn't catch me watching, and I thought, well now, there's the girl on the milk crate. Took the long way home. They mostly do. So that's the story. If you take one thing tonight from an old cook, take this. Every family's got a switchboard, and every family's got somebody quiet who pays for things, and the two are usually not the same person. Check your wiring. Call the folks you only ever hear about secondhand, direct, tonight, their own number, because the story going around about them was written by whoever's holding the phone. And it is amazing, it is a pure wonder, what a lie needs in order to live. Mostly it just needs nobody making one quiet call. And if you're the one paying, keep paying like nobody's watching, because somebody always is. The vendors know. The florist knows. The town's a big room and the walls take notes. You set the table and let the story catch up to you. It generally arrives around the toasts. It's evening here now. There's pie in this house, lattice top, lemon you can't quite taste, third try since I lost my pie maker, and the first one Emily says is right. The lilacs are done for the year, but done isn't gone. That's true of more things than flowers. And the porch lights on. It always is. If this story found you somewhere quiet tonight, stay a while. There's a new one on this porch every week, and the light's on for you too. This has been the Porch Light. This story, like all stories told here, is an original work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental. Good night, friend. Drive safe going home.